We're back. We're talking about Drive to Survive, Season 7. And I told you that every day we're going to review an episode. And like the idiot that I am, I tell you I'm a babbling idiot. I tell you that. And yesterday we reviewed and recapped episode 1, but it really was episode 2. Because when I went, let me tell you, when I went to the Netflix, right, you turn the Netflix on and you press the damn thing, and it comes on, and you press your little face and you go to your little preview menu, and it had Drive to Survive. And since I've watched every season, I just pressed it, right? And it's supposed to go to the newest episode. And so what it did, instead of going to episode 1 of season 7, it went to episode 2. Like episode 1 is like kind of a review, like, of what happened last year, and then like a kind of preview of some of the things that happened this year or last year in 2024, but it was a review of 2023. And anyway, instead of going to episode 1, it went to episode 2. So I called episode 1 it's episode 2, not episode 1. So I have to go correct that online. But just from me to you, I'm an idiot. But today, I've learned from my mistakes. We're going to talk about episode 3, and we're going to go back and talk about episode 1. We're like going ahead, and then we'll go back. I think we're just going to keep forging ahead. We're going to go 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, because there's 10 episodes. We'll get all the way to 10, and then we'll go back and do 1. Oh, so crazy. But in this episode, it's the Lewis leaving Ferrari episode. It's all about Lewis leaving Ferrari. But the episode's called Looking Out for Number 1. Kind of meaning that Lewis is looking out for himself, and then Mercedes has to capitulate and then look out for themselves. So we're going to talk about all that. And we're going to talk about that here on...
Yeah, America F1. America F1. It's a golden run. America F1.
So, welcome to America F1. Please like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification so you can be reminded when we have a new episode of America F1 hitting your airways, whether you're listening on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. We're also found on Amazon Podcasts, Iheart Radio, and basically wherever you can find your podcast and you listen to it, we're there. And we thank you for listening in on today's show. And today we are talking about episode 3 of Drive to Survive. We're doing a recap, and the episode's called Looking Out for Number 1, but I called it Lewis leaving Ferrari. But here's the thing. There's no Lewis really. It's about Lewis leaving to Ferrari. It's Lewis leaving Mercedes to Ferrari. So you think in the episode they would have Lewis, his reaction, some interviews, some insight onto what makes Lewis tick, his life, his friends. No. There's no Lewis. There's a glimpse of him, but there's no interviews. There's no reaction. There's no insights. There's no following Lewis around, designing clothes, hanging out with Roscoe, walking down the beach shirtless. I don't know. He's not in the damn thing. He's barely, okay? It's the focus of the show's 100% about Toto Wolff, his relationship with George Russell, his reaction to Lewis leaving, and then him trying to decide if George is going to be the number 1 driver, and then Toto going out and the reaction from other teams who may want to get a seat at Mercedes. So then they have this whole thing with Carlos Sainz, and is Carlos coming, and can we afford Carlos, and how would he be for the team, blah, blah, blah. some great cinematography in this episode. I loved it. Some great shots of Monaco, the coastline. It starts out with Toto Wolff and Susie Wolff on their balcony, and you have the great shot of Monaco in the background. You have the sea. It's so beautiful. This life could be yours. No, it can't. No, it can't. But Toto's talking about like Lewis, and Susie's like, well, who can replace him? And like Toto's basically like, no one can really replace him. But they don't go into the backstory. And we all of us know who went through last year, especially if you're a Lewis fan, if you're a Ferrari fan, if you're a Mercedes fan, if you're an F1 fan, you know that last year was pretty strange for Lewis and the way he's leaving. Remember, all the chicanery and all the things that happened, and Toto going into the media and talking about, oh, he didn't know. I mean, typically when guys leave, they tell him at the end of the season. Lewis told him in the beginning of the season, so he had time to find somebody else. He had time. Okay. If you didn't know, they came to Lewis. They offered him a contract. He wanted to be a brand ambassador. They said no to him being a brand ambassador, and they basically said no to the money that he wanted and the years he wanted. So basically it was like a 1-1, no brand ambassadorship. So Lewis was like, remember he had got the year before, and I had told you this here on the show, that Lewis, he had got a $40 million offer a year from Ferrari. And I said he should take it because, it's Ferrari. And they're not going to, unless they offer you what you want at Mercedes, it's a good time to go, because the ship was kind of, he hadn't won a race in 2 years before the British Grand Prix, remember, right? So they wouldn't listen to him on the car, and you saw that in Drive to Survive the previous year, where he was disappointed when he was talking about, well, I told him this direction the car should go, and they basically told me to shut up and drive. And then down the road, they come back to me and said, well, I guess you were right. So there was a lot of things going on behind the scenes that they didn't show in this episode. A lot. What else didn't they show? I mean, so Lewis wins the British Grand Prix. I was there with my son. It was awesome. It was raining. It was great. And I told everybody that was sitting around me, I said, if it starts to rain, Lewis is going to win this race. Watch. And people, British fans, they're like, yeah, he has a great chance. I said, no, there's no great chance. He's going to win this race. You think they would show the reaction? You'd think they would show Lewis's family and their reaction and his friends' reaction and the reaction of the crowd and the reaction in the paddock. No. Okay, what else did they miss? I mean, they missed so much in this episode, and when you were there and you know all the little nuances to the story, and you're like, man, they're leaving a lot of meat on the bone. And so this is where Drive to Survive is not controversial. It shows a little of the background. It gives you some backstory of some people, but doesn't really get in depth into the weeds. It's not like investigative reporting or anything like that. But on this instance, it's not even a good representation of Lewis leaving for Ferrari. It's not. It's really glossed over. They don't really go in depth. You don't hear from Lewis. You don't really hear behind the scenes like from Ferrari. What were they thinking and how that negotiation go? And you didn't hear from Toto Wolff on what the negotiation was and why he thought Lewis was leaving. He was acting like it's a total shock. He's a businessman. Lewis made that guy a billionaire. Without Lewis Hamilton, Toto Wolff is not a billionaire. Believe me when I tell you this, people. Mercedes is not the brand that you think it would be without Lewis Hamilton. And they forgot that. And you can see by just going to the socials and all the people that have left the Mercedes-AMG Petronas team fan page and following them on Instagram and following them on X, and they'll go compare that to how much is now at Ferrari and how much they've picked up on their socials. There literally is no comparison. But what else did they miss? I'm going to tell you. So, all right, they had a great shot of Toto Wolff. He's on the water with George, and George is shirtless for all you ladies out there. Ooh. But it's beautiful. It's a beautiful shot of Monaco coastline, and they're talking, and Toto's talking to George about, can he lead the team and what it is to be a leader. And, George had gone through some mishaps when leading the race or chasing down the race. He'd get crashed out, The saying was last year, if George crashes out, Carlos Sainz is going to win the race, right? Every time George crashed, Carlos Sainz won the race. So there was things going on last year like, well, George crashed, I guess Carlos is going to win the race then. But they were talking about, even George talked about, there's just little mistakes he would make when either in contention for the lead or in the lead that would lead him not to winning the race. Now, being at Silverstone, I thought that Oscar Piastri was the one that could have won that race if they hadn't pitted him and put him on the wrong tires. And the reason why I say that, because there's about 4 or 5 laps, like when Oscar took the lead, there's about maybe 3 or 4 laps, he was gone, man. His pace was awesome. And then for whatever reason, it's wet. I get it. He doesn't have he just doesn't have, not the information. I'm just gonna say the seniority. He hasn't been there long enough and the experience to know what tires to put on at the right moment. And Lewis did, and Lewis said he wanted to stay out, and that was the right decision. And then when he came in for every decision, if you were at the race and if you were listening to the onboards and everything, every decision that Lewis made in that race was the correct one. And then when Lando was coming in for tires, and remember, he put on the softs and he should have put on the mediums, and he probably would have won that race, or at least have a chance to winning that race. But he said, what did Lewis do? They said, well, they told him what Verstappen did, and they told him what Lewis had done. And he took, well, if Lewis put on the softs, I'll put on the softs. But the McLaren was running better with the mediums. And at that time, he should have put on the mediums because his tires, he put on the softs, his tires kind of went off at the end, and then Max passed him up, and he went from second place to third place, and Max went into second. And neither one of them were catching Lewis, but if he had put on those mediums, he probably would have had a better opportunity and a better chance. He definitely would have stayed in second. Anyway, I digress. So then they go to Spa, and Spa, it was the race where George's car came in underweight. Remember, because Spa doesn't have, you can't do an extra lap and pick up, all, on your tires, you can't pick up all the runoff, all the smudge and stack your tire with, all the loose gravel and pickup. They call it the pickup. You can't pick up because there's no hot lap and then go into the paddock and in the pits, and go and wave to the crowd. Like when the race is over, you go right in because it's such a short, it's an older track, and that's just how it works. You don't have enough time to go all the way around. You won't have enough fuel. You'll run out of fuel because it's a longer track. So it's right there, and you go right in. So there's no lap to pick up. So, and they say on the pickup, they can usually get about 4 kilos per tire. So that's 16 to 20 kilos more of weight. And since George didn't come in to change tires, he stayed out. He burned off all the rubber on the tires. So the car came in underweight. And so what subsequently happened, they turned the wind that George had, and Lewis had finished second. Lewis had run a fabulous race, but they pitted him because they thought the tires weren't going to last at the end. And so subsequently, George was penalized, and Lewis got first place. They didn't show that. They didn't show any of that. They didn't show any of that. They didn't show, like, just think of the TV here. George's face when he wins. Then George's face when he finds out he's been disqualified. Then Hamilton's face when George wins when he should have won. And then Hamilton's face when George gets disqualified. And then now his reaction to now he's winning. None of that. That'd have been awesome TV. And I think they didn't print that, or they probably filmed it and they didn't put it in. And I would say it's because Mercedes probably said, hey, we don't want this in there. So it shows our team in a bad light. It shows us, we don't want that shown. And that's what I think happened. I think a lot of things, and I also think that Lewis is not even in this episode really. They don't talk to him, they don't interview him. And I think because what I've heard, he's doing his own type of Drive to Survive or his own type of episodic type television of his life or him racing. And I think I think Amazon has the rights to that from what I've been told. So I think that is why Lewis is not really in this episode. And then they got Carlos Sainz, and Carlos Sainz was the hot property last year. Everybody was saying, well, it's a no-brainer, him going to Mercedes, having him and George team up. I think that'd be a pretty good pair. And for Carlos, at least he'd have a chance to win races still and be on podiums, because leaving Ferrari, and everybody loves Carlos. He made some great decisions. I mean, think about it. All the mistakes that Ferrari makes, or used to make, I should say, especially in 2023. And Carlos, a lot of times, he's the one saying, I'm staying out. They tell him, hey, pit. And he said no. And then he'd tell him, well, I need to pit. And all of his strategy decisions were on point. Carlos is the man when it comes to that. He can be going 220 miles an hour and make split-second decisions about his strategy, and 9 times out of 10, it's on point. 9 times out of 10. I actually would put Carlos's acumen when it comes to strategy right up there with Lewis and right up there with Fernando and Max. Because a lot of times Max will come on the radio and say, hey, you guys, you put me on this shit strategy and you asking me to do this. I told you this and I told you that was not gonna work and you didn't want to listen. So basically, F off and leave me alone and let me drive the car. And you hear him do that all the time. That's why I love that guy. He's just right to it, man. Like, right to the point. So, anyway, Carlos Sainz was the hot property, and they were all looking to get Carlos. And you had Carlos going around to all the garages, and everybody's waiting, and, oh, Carlos. One of the reasons why they didn't go to Carlos probably is Carlos is 30. Let's go to our computer over here. I'll give you some background on Carlos Sainz since we are talking about him. Carlos Sainz's number is the number 55. He has 4 wins in his career, 27 podiums. He's 30 years old. Last year he finished 5th in the driver's title with 290 points. His last win was 2024 Mexico Grand Prix. Carlos is a good driver. 209 starts in Formula One. I could turn this off because it's probably the light is hitting. But no, Carlos is a good driver. But then they switch. And they show Kimi Antonelli in F2 and Toto Wolff watching the F2 race. And he's there. And he's really impressed with Kimi's times, and he's really impressed with how fast Kimi is, and he's really impressed by Kimi. Kimi. And he also, they don't say it in this episode, but he was saying behind the scenes and in magazines and stuff, he didn't want to miss out on the next Max Verstappen. So, he thought that Kimi has the ability to be the next new thing in Formula One. So, knowing that, he didn't want to miss out on that. And so he goes to Kimi and he tells him or calls him and says, hey, you're going to be driving for us next year. And then so, you got Kimi and his dad and, his mom, and they have a scene with them. He's Italian, so eventually he'll be, if Lewis leaves and they don't give Ollie Berman a seat, maybe he'll be in contention for the Ferrari seat because he's Italian. So what better way for Ferrari to keep going, right? After Lewis leaves. But I think Ollie Berman's really good too. And so either way, if Ollie's in the seat or if Kimi Antonelli's in the seat down the road, and Charles is still there, Ferrari's going to be fine. But in concluding about this episode, I loved it because of the cinematography. I didn't like it because there was a lot of things they left out on the table. But if you're a new fan, you get kinda an idea. You basically get a little insight into Toto Wolff, basically, is what you get on a team principal and the things that they go through when having to pick a new driver and the team dynamics. You didn't really see the behind the scenes snide things that were happening, that some of the things that Toto said in the media that he probably shouldn't have said. You don't see, Lewis's reaction not to being given the contract that he wanted. And then his mindset of, well, if they're not going to give me the contract that I want, then maybe I should go elsewhere. You don't see any of that. You don't see Ferrari's negotiating behind the scene. You don't see any of that. I thought that was a lot of things that could have been said and could have been shown. So overall, this episode comparatively to the first episode, or I should say second episode, this is episode 3. So episode 2 I thought was better for Lando fans. If you're a fan, if you want to be a fan, if you're a fan of the drivers, episode 2 is a better episode than episode 3. Episode 3 is more about Toto and the principal. And I still a little ambivalent. I have ambivalent feelings about dads in Formula One and principals in Formula One. Meaning that it's like, I think they get too much airtime. They're not driving the car. It's like the manager of your soccer team. They're always on the news and always in the media and always in the pictures and always in the videos. I don't, it's about the drivers to me. I think the principals are important, but I don't think they should overshine the drivers. And I think sometimes they're a little bit more media, I'm going to say a bad word here. They're more of a media whore than the actual driver is, I think. I think the drivers, you can see, it's part of their job. They kind of get tired of it. And we'll talk about that later in later episodes. They're following Charles Leclerc when he was at Monaco. And it seems like the poor guy, everywhere he was jogging with his dog, like everywhere he goes, people want pictures. People are stopping their car. Hey, can I get a picture? And, that's great for your ego and that's good. I would say probably 50-60% of the time you're like, yeah, people love me, I'll take a picture with them. But then that other 40%, you're like, man, I just want to eat my burrito. I just want to eat my sandwich. Can I just have some peace? But that's the life that they chose. That's the life they lived. I'm going to give episode 3 a 9 on photography, cinematography, 7 on storyline, and a 4 on delivery. Tune in tomorrow where we review episode 4 here at America F1, and everybody keep on racing, everybody.
No. No.